In the UK, the gig economy has created many so-called zero-hours contracts. These are jobs that do not guarantee any minimum hours of work. Well, are they good for employees and good for the economy, or are they coercive employment that replaces traditional jobs? Well, new research has looked at the evidence. Hello, Juan, welcome.
Hello, Tim. Good morning.
Now, Juan, first of all, for people that don't live in the UK especially, could you explain this controversial system of 0 hours contracts and who they apply to?
Okay, so let me just start by briefly describing how I came across this issue. I was in the UK in 2018 or around those dates, and I read in the newspapers that McDonald's, that the company was using massively 0 hour contracts, was offering their workers to change these contracts into to shift them into fixed hours contracts, part-time and temporary contracts, etc. And that 80% of 120,000 workers that were offered this deal refused it. So I said, how can it be that these contracts, which are being accused of being coercive, of being sort of semi-slavery, are loved by workers? So that's how I started. The 0 hour contracts is something which is not really new. They are quite well known in the UK, but they also exist in different formats in other countries, including European Union countries like Italy, like Germany, like Ireland, like Finland, and so on. So basically, the definition is that the employer is not required to establish a minimum number of working hours, and the worker is entitled to decline any workload offered. So that's why it's called zero, because there could be no hours of work in there, and therefore no wage. They differ from these other countries in the sense that in the UK you have these intermediate states between employee and self-employed, and which is zero workers under 0 hour contracts are entitled, for instance, to the minimum wage, paid holidays, pension plans, etc. What they are not entitled is to any severance payment. So they don't have all the rights of employees. They have more rights than the self-employed. So there is this category in between. And in some of these countries that I was mentioning before, for instance, minimum number of hours established in many of them. Okay, so this is what makes them special. They existed for a long time. Even one can go back to the 19th century, where the piece rates, which were prevalent in the dock industry, were not so dissimilar to 0 hour contracts. They had different names: on call, reservists, if and when, but they've been there. In the UK, they really surged after the Great Recession. So before that, like 200,000 employees, slightly less, were employed under these contracts. And then since 2014 or 2013, the number started surging, and they reached a plateau of about 1 million, which is about 3% of the workforce in the UK.
And they are controversial, aren't they? They are criticised by many people. Often you find them on the news, in the press. Is that because there's this perception that it tips the balance of power in favour of the employer?
Well, for sure. But then when you read what happened at McDonald's, and when some of the opinions, for instance, there is a foundation in the UK called the Resolution Foundation, who's done a lot of work, very good work on these contracts. And of course, remember, these contracts are designed to take advantage of the flexibility that the firms need and some of the workers need. When you look, for instance, at the distribution of 0 hour contracts by age, you see that they are highly concentrated at the young ages, say 16 to 24, and then from 55 onwards. So basically an example would be the janitors or the proctors in exams, or for instance, people doing some delivery work, etc. These are the ones who are holding these contracts. And of course, if you think of a student, for instance, they may have to attend courses, they may have to take exams, so they are not really happy with a fixed hour contract, because and the same happens with more elderly people who may have other obligations, family obligations or whatever, and they don't want, I'm not talking about a 9-to-5 job, but I would talk a 4-hour job a day or something like that. So they really appreciate this flexibility. So I think both extremes, those who claim that these are the panacea and those who claim that these are slavery contracts, I don't think this is a very balanced view. So that's what we try to do in the paper. We try to weigh which are the pros and cons of these contracts. And basically what we focus is on 3 questions. Is how many jobs are created through these contracts? Then, of course, that's what we call a job creation effect. Then there is what we call a job substitution effect, which means how many of these contracts could be replaced by regular contracts. And third is this participation issue. How many of the people holding 0-hour contracts would not participate in the labor market if these contracts were to be banned?
You created a model, didn't you, to evaluate the effect on these 3 dimensions and used survey data there. Do you find from this model that 0 hours contracts do create more jobs?
Yes, we do find, I mean, the exercise we do, we look at 0-hour contracts not in the whole UK labor market, because I don't think there is a substitution with 9-to-5 jobs, open-ended contracts and so on. So we look at the low-paid segment of the UK labor market, which is about 7% of total employment. The low-paid, these are people who are paid around the minimum wage. Okay, at the minimum wage, slightly higher, slightly below. So what we find is that the exercise we look at is what happened if the politician chose to ban these contracts, and then what we find is about 5% of firms in that segment of the labor market would not be able to open vacancies. So these are firms that, because they have very volatile demand or very volatile orders, either they open it on 0-hour contracts or they don't open vacancies at all. And also we find that about 4% of the workers will quit the labor force. So these are the semi-retirees, the students who, unless they have this possibility, they would not participate in the labor market. So we also compute welfare effects across, because people are differentiated according to their time availability. So like a student or an elderly guy might not be able to work any day and work for more than two or 3 hours. So these are the people who suffer higher welfare losses in case of a ban. Okay, so that's basically, so banning 0-hour contracts. If we look at the unemployment rate in this segment, we obtain that a rise of about 2 percentage points in unemployment rate, which is about 9-10% higher than in the overall labor market. But then on top of that, 4% of people will quit, and therefore non-employment will rise by 6 percentage points.
This is interesting because it's in the news at the moment, the number of people that have just dropped out of the labour force, especially as a result of COVID-19. And you're saying that 0 hours contracts acts as a way to keep some of these people in the labour force because they can work more on their terms.
Yeah. Also, there is an effect that we stress in the paper, which is in our model, people look sort of randomly for short-time work. And then if you land in a 0-hour contract and the wage and the conditions are above your reservation wages, then the issue is that they are less effective in searching. They search on the job. Some of them may wish to get a regular job, but being even if for a few hours on a 0-hour contracts decreases their efficiency in the search. So this implies like a negative externality in the matching of regular, safer jobs against the need of firms of adjust this volatile demand.
The objections to 0 hours contracts are often that work that could be done under a more standard labour contract is then converted to 0 hours, and that strips away workers' rights to things like holiday pay, for example. Does your work touch on that?
Yeah, we look at this substitution effect. So how many firms, where 0-hour contracts be banned, how many firms would switch to regular contracts? And what we find is about 5% of those firms in the low-paid segment don't do that. So these are jobs which are lost in a sense. Okay. Of course, 95% would change. So you have to look at the other side of the story. So, but the 5% of firms will not either post 0-hour contracts or nothing.
There is, as you say, a strong political movement to severely limit 0 hours contracts or to ban them altogether. On the evidence that you have from this paper, do you think they are misguided?
I think they are slightly misguided. So we, at the end of our paper, we draw a few policy recommendations, and one of them is that we follow the McDonald's example. So I think people should be offered both contracts and then make a free choice. Okay, so that would be our offer. The second one is, of course, they should be more targeted to small firms rather than large firms. A large firm is easier to accommodate big changes in demand, okay? Whereas in small firms, it will be more difficult. So I think they should be maybe limited, that's maybe a strong word, but maybe targeted towards small firms. And then there is the issue, of course, that in principle, the employer, if I decline a workload because I'm taking an exam or whatever, then of course they cannot take any measures against me. But in practice, that might not be the case. So there is the issue that these contracts don't specify very well what are the consequences of actions by firms against workers. That this can be very subtle. So, for instance, I decline delivering something, and then the firm doesn't send me anything over the next week. Yeah, that I would recommend a great movie by Ken Loach, which is called "Sorry We Miss You," which is not about the 0-hour contract. It's about a guy who works in a fulfillment center, sort of Amazon, something like that. And it's an old guy who really needs the money for that. And then you can see what happens when he fails to deliver something.
It is a great film, isn't it? And it really does capture exactly the two sides of the story on this. And this will continue to be controversial, won't it? But Juan, thank you very much for talking about your work.
Thanks a lot to you for giving me the opportunity of talking about my research.
Well, this is one of those subjects that everyone's got an opinion on, so if you read the paper, you'll be well informed. The paper is called 0 Hours Contracts in a Frictional Labour Market. It is discussion paper 16843 at CEPR. The authors are Juan Dolado, Etienne Lallet, and Hélène Touron. You can download it using the link that's on screen now. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.